So in this video, we're going to go over the general setup of GeoTracker Pro for first-time users or reinstallation of GeoTracker Pro for a pre-existing user. So in the last video, we already went over installing or setting up the license. So now we have GeoTracker Pro opening up, but right now it doesn't do much of anything. So we need to set some things up. Firstly, we need to go into Preferences and set up our flash card drive. So in here, this is where the flash medium drive letter is going to come up depending on what we have. So if I have, like, say, a monitor 5, I plug in a USB thumb drive. You can see in this case, oops, that's not what we want, but the drive letter is D. That's what it comes up with in Windows. So we're going to make this the monitor 5 flash drive. So what we're going to do is, well, I plugged the flash drive in after I launched GeoTracker, so I need to close out of GeoTracker here. Bring that back up. If I go to Preferences and I go to Flash Card Drive Settings, I should now be able to change the USB thumb drive to the letter D. And if I had an SD card drive or a CF card drive for monitor 4S or for monitor 4 respectively, I can set those drive letters as well. So once we have that set, that's the first thing we need to get going. The next thing we need to know is our starting location. So right here under the map, it probably will send you default to Sanford, which is where we're based out of. But obviously that may not be where you're based out of, so that's probably not a good starting point for you. So under starting location, if you change the address here to somewhere else, so I'm just going to throw in an arbitrary address, 73769 Creekwater Terrace, Lake Mary, Florida 32746. It's an old address. I don't live there no more, but as you can see, not all that much far from over here. This is where it would be at in general. But the idea is now you see up here it says that address and it centers your map here. So anytime I go into GeoTracker Pro, when it boots the map up from Google Maps, it's going to center on that address. So that's how you set that up. The next thing that you want to set up is under Devices and Features. You're going to go into here and you're going to select which devices you have and also what output devices you have. Now, yes, I understand that these are probably going to be matching, so why did we separate them? There's some complex configurations where some of these need to be checked where their output pairs don't. We can ignore that for now. For the most part, just know that if you have the device, check it off. So if you're a guy who only has monitor 4S's and monitor 5 units, then just check off monitor 4S and monitor 5. If you have parking lot download, this is where you need to make sure that that is actually checked off. So we're going to hit OK. So that's the next section, is under Preferences and Devices and Features. The last area will be the default directories folder. Now by default, it's going to go to C ground. You can change that directory to somewhere else, however you see fit. Just note that if you've already started collecting missions in a folder, if you go to Browse and you change it to another directory, those missions will not carry over. So you need to make sure that you start or move those files over first before you go changing things in here and then importing other new missions. The other thing to note too is this folder, which right now is my C ground directory. You will see that I have files in here, and as a user I have read, write, and modify and execute privileges in this folder, because technically I am an admin on this box, but you will need to make sure that the permissions to this folder is read, write, and modify, and you will also want to make sure that the files in here are not set up to anything oblong, such as under attributes having things like compress components to save disk space or this encrypt thing. If you do that, you may not find your files when you're looking for them. So by default that isn't the case, but just in case you have an overzealous IT person, that is something to note. Alright, so now that we've got these things all set up, now we would go down through the rest of the settings. So for GeoPro, this is a different product. This is not GeoTracker or GeoTracker Pro. This is a thing called GeoPro, which will probably be changing its name here in the near future, as it's no longer an ADAPCO product. It's owned by a company called Skysoft. If you go into here, this is where you would set your username and password up for that system, and what this will allow you to do is, if you go under export format, if you have missions in here, you'll be able to send those ones up to GeoPro, and then GeoPro will do some processing to those mission chunks. We'll move on to the next one here, chemicals. This is where we set up your chemicals that you spray out of your truck. So in here, we'll just go and add a new chemical. We'll just call this thing something like, I don't know, I'm just going to make up a chemical here, so we'll just call this chemical 1. You'll want to probably put in the proper name like Permacease or Phyphon EW or what have you. You set in here whether it be a adulticide or a larvicide, so you can do that in here, and then you want to put down the cost per gallon. If you set it as larvicide, it'll be cost per gallon / pound, because we don't know if you're talking about something that's liquid or solid. But in here, this is where you would set all these settings. So we'll just make up a scenario here where this chemical costs $100 a gallon. We'll just say application rate, ounces per minute, and speed. If you give me 2 of these, I can tell you the third. So in this case, let's just say I'm spraying a chemical at 8 ounces a minute at 10 miles an hour. That tells me the application rate is 1.32 ounces per acre. This is basing it off of a hard set value that the EPA has set at 300 foot swaths. So that's how that calculation is derived. The manual flow rate, if you have a monitor 4 or 4S or 5, you have the ability to set a manual flow rate. And what that allows for you to do is, if you have permissions to do so on that monitor device, it'll spray at a fixed flow rate. Most people put in their 10 mile an hour rate here, but there are certain scenarios where this may or may not be that case. So consult with your chemical sales rep. As of active ingredients, this is where you would look at the label. Now, you don't have to put anything in here. If you choose not to put in any of the active ingredients, it's not going to break anything. Just make sure that you check off the box here that says ignore active ingredients. However, if you do have that information, we'll just say, for example, this thing has permethrin. We'll just say, I don't know, 1.67 pounds per gallon. We'll just say that's what's on the label. And then PBO, and we'll do the same thing, 1.67 pounds per gallon. Then it will also require you to put in a formulation ratio. So how many parts chemical versus how many parts inert. So in this case, we're going to say 1 part chemical for every 9 parts inert. Basically 10% of the stuff is what you're looking for, and hit OK. So now we have a chemical that's inside of this software. Likewise, we have trucks, so let's set that up. If we go into parameters, this is the global parameters for all of your trucks. You're going to set your spray between cutoff speeds here. Most people use the default of 5 and 20, but your miles may vary. And then the alarms, that's if the alarm on the handheld on the monitor 4 and 4S or the touchscreen on the monitor 5, when it yells at you for approaching the speed while still having the ability to spray. So most people set the low alarm to 0, they just turn it off. And on the high alarm, most people set it to 1 mile an hour less than their cutoff speed. So if our cutoff here for high is 20, the high alarm is 19, 1 less. Lastly, this probably should say monitor 4S and monitor 5 because they're both using this. You're setting up your time zone. This is where you set your time zone so that the monitor knows to offset the clock from the GPS by whatever time zone you're currently in. So once you have all that set, let's take a look at trucks, the actual individual ones themselves. If we go to add, we can give ourselves a truck. We'll just call this MC01. We can set the spray colors to whatever, but the default is green and red for on and off respectively. And you can set your short stop time and long stop times on your map to whatever you want them in minutes. So the short stop time will put a symbol on the map if a vehicle stays stationary, but while in an on state for whatever amount of time, in this case 15. And it'll create a different symbol on the map if it discovers that it's been there for 45 minutes or longer. So kind of a little way to see if a truck's been sitting in a location for an extended period of time. The other thing you can put in here is the cost per mile. At the time of this video, the IRS, I believe, is setting it to 57 cents per mile for traveling, so we kind of thought that was a good benchmark for here. But obviously you can set it to whatever, especially if you happen to have like trucks that are, constantly in maintenance. Their cost per mile to exist on the road may be a higher value. If you have parking lot download, this is where you set up the network settings for those vehicles. So you'd put in an IP address, a subnet mask, a gateway, and then 2 DNS values. Now, if you have DHCP and you don't want to do static IP addresses, you set the IP address to 0.0.0.0, but you still do need to populate the rest of this information, as that's not going to get pulled over by DHCP. So if your subnet mask is 255.0.0.0 and your gateway is something like, I don't know, 10.1.1.1, and then you have your DNS servers. You can even use the generic Google ones like 4.2.2.2 and 8.8.8.8. There you go. Your truck is now set to go right on the network as it's supposed to. So that's how you set up your trucks. And to note, if you ever have to change anything like delete a truck, or same thing with chemicals, if you need to delete or edit something, you go under the respective menu and go to edit. This is where you can change those things, those values. So that's that right there. If we go under drivers, let's add a driver here. We'll just put myself in, Eric. And then you give it a PIN number. Must be any number between 1 and 9,999, aka must be at least 4, or must be up to 4 digits. So in this case, we'll put in 1975. I don't know why, just random number set here. And we'll give myself the ability to calibrate and to go into that manual flow rate we mentioned earlier under chemicals, where I can go into a fixed flow mode. And then hit OK. To actually make a note of that here, if we go into chemicals and edit, remember how we set the manual flow rate to 8 ounces a minute? If I didn't actually give myself that checkbox permission, no matter what, I would not be able to invoke this. I would have to be in variable flow mode no matter what. This can be a problem because if you drive slower than, say, your 10-mile-an-hour rate, and you use a 10-mile-an-hour rate for your manual flow rate, you will be over-applying. Conversely, if you're traveling faster than your 10-mile-an-hour rate and you have your manual flow rate set to 10 miles an hour and you're spraying, you will be under-applying. But sometimes manual flow rate is a necessity. Either maybe the GPS is acting wonky due to interference from outside force, or you're stuck in like a cul-de-sac or something where you kind of just have to do that. This is where manual flow rate becomes a necessity for some folks. But again, if you don't wish for your drivers to have that ability, just to be safe, you can make sure they don't have the manual flow permission checked off. And calibration, that is for your actual calibration of the FMI pump on the sprayer, not droplet calibration. That's a totally different thing. But this gives this driver right here, with this PIN number, the ability to calibrate that FMI pump. So that's how that's set up. Now, these are some features that are specific to Monitor 5, but can be semi-utilized, I guess, with other versions of the monitor. The Monitor 5 has a touchscreen with a moving map, so there's other things we can put on there that you can't do on a Monitor 4 or 4S, as it doesn't have that kind of a screen. But you can still see things in GeoTracker as well. What I mean by that is, one thing you can do is you can create spray zones. So on the Monitor 4 and 4S, spray zones were typed in as an area ID on the handheld terminal. On Monitor 5, it comes up as a drop-down list with the boundaries being shown on the screen. That's handled by going to spray zones, and right now I'm going to turn spray zones on so we see them on the map. Obviously there are none because this is a fresh install, but let's draw some. So we can either import these spray zones from a file. So if you happen to have somebody who draws KML files or Esri shape files, you can bring them in. In this case, I don't have any that are in that form, so I'm just going to draw them myself. So if I go to spray zones and I go to draw on map and go to add, I can draw one right here. We'll just make this spray zone. We'll just call that Zone 1. And then maybe we'll draw another one here. Add another. Call this Zone 3. Oh, yeah, Zone 3. Kind of doing this out of order here. And then we'll just draw one more here. And we'll call this Zone 2. So now we have 3 spray zones. Now, if we accidentally need to rename one of these, if we go to spray zones, go to draw on map and edit, and call zone 1, maybe that's zone 1A, and we have another zone 1 that we'll draw later, you can do that. So all this does is it draws an arbitrary polygon on the map, and if you load up monitor 4 and 4S missions, it's just a graphical thing, a way to basically express different zones on your screen. However, on the monitor 5, it'll actually bring these polygons into the screen so that when you select the spray zone, it's going to draw a boundary of just that spray zone on the screen. Kind of an idea of saying, hey driver, color within the lines, like if you're doing color pencil drawings or something. So that's spray zones. You can also add spray zones to a list. This is basically if you're too busy to actually draw all your spray zones and you just want to populate the list for the driver to select in his drop down, but you don't really care about drawing it on the map anywhere, you can also do that from this add spray zone to list idea. Lastly, if we go to sites of interest, I'm going to turn those on as well. You have the ability to add spray zones or how do I want to call this? Do spray zones and do not spray zones, I guess is a good way to put it. So on here, you can do this one of a couple of ways. You can physically drop a point by going to draw and say, yeah, there's an apiary right there. We'll call this ape 10, and it's got a radius of 150 feet. Boom. And if I zoom up on it, it'll give it a name. So we could do that. We could go into sites of interest and go to add, and we can type in the name here. We'll call this ape 20. Put this as a radius in feet of 250, but in this case I have an address to do it with. So we'll call this one 550 Arrow Lane, Sanford, Florida. And now we have ape 20 drawn at 550 Arrow Lane with that radius. So there's different ways you can drop these sites of interest. Now, these sites of interest, like I said, they can be classified as either a do or must spray here zone or a do not spray here zone. It's based off of a point in a radius, not a polygon. But when you go to export a mission to a monitor device, it will take these points and put them on the screen. If you start driving and you are entering the radius of this thing here, it will basically scream at you saying, hey, you are about to enter, in this case, ape 20. You're about to enter ape 20. It's not going to cut off the sprayer. It's not going to turn on your sprayer. It's just going to warn you as a graphical indication saying, hey, because it's going to flash at you and everything. It's going to say, hey, you know, you're entering this thing. Make sure you know what you're doing here. But that's it for this video. This was kind of a long one, but there's a lot to set up in your first setup for GeoTracker. But that should give you an idea as to these things that you need. If you want to disable them off your screen so they don't clutter things, you can always go to spray zone and unselect, and then that hides them. But anyways, yeah, that's it for this video. On the next video, we're going to go over bringing in missions and looking at them and seeing what we can do with those. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching.